Freedom Fighters, I'm coming back at you with another Friday weekly news wrap up. Well, actually, I'm going to mix it up a little bit and do something different. I've been saying for a while I was going to try to change up the Friday episodes, which, if you're new here, by the way, I do a Monday, Friday show. Friday, I usually wrap up the weekly news or whatnot, but every once in a while I do something different. And these days, I'm kind of just going off the cuff and doing whatever I want anyway. But talking about weekly news, how about that Pam Bondi hearing? And I mean, boy, was that a doozy. So you got her up there, covering up and defending for the E-files, and you heard the big viral clip of, oh, what are you complaining about? The Dow Jones is at 50K. Your 401k is, sky high. The so-and-so S&P 500 is at sky high. Everything's doing great. What are you complaining about? Don't worry about, what's going on with it. And by the way, who has a 401k, right? Who's got all these retirement benefits? Who's in the stock market? Who's got all these? She's basically talking to the room, right? Of politicians and elites, and they're basically all just gloating over the spoils of the rich, while the peasants are suffering and taxed to death and overspent and just trying to live. And meanwhile, she's like, oh, don't worry about what's going on with, the elites abducting children and putting them through torture sessions, and what goes on, right? The worst, most unimaginable things possible. And then, Harrison Smith was on IW and put out, a great message, which he said, this is akin to you coming home to your family and your wife is like, I got something to tell you. Our daughter was, you know, raped today, and she was tortured and she was held, captive by this monster, and all this stuff done to her. And you're like, well, honey, look, little Susie's gonna be okay. All right, she's gonna get over it, and she'll move on. But don't worry about it because everything's great. I just got a promotion at work. I'm moving on up, and he doubled my pay. I was making whatever, I was making 500K. I'm making $1 million now. And he said there's even more room for me to move up. I might double my pay next year. I may be at 2 million. He says if I start acting real good, I could be at the top of the company. I might be making millions by the end of this thing. And your wife is just looking at you dumbfounded. And then he said, that's when you realize where your daughter was raped by the boss, right? That's what happened, and this is the payout, and you're accepting the payout, and our your duty as a father or as a man in general, your number one priority is to take care of that and not live with that evil and not live with that injustice. But, a couple dollars can swing you the other way. And that's essentially what our country is saying. And what I've talked about before about, how Donald Trump always comes out there and we have no arrest. We have no accountability. We have nothing. But then he comes out and he goes, oh, eggs are coming down. Oh, did you see the gas price? Your gas is $1 down. As if our country, our culture is only an economic zone, right? And I've seen this, placed, talked about like this in many ways, where it's just like, what are you complaining about? Things are great. And this is what Republicans, old guard, neocon Republicans always talk about. What are you complaining about? we've got the world on track for record GDP, and America's in a position of strength and all this stuff. Meanwhile, our communities dwindle, our roads are falling apart, the bridges, everything's collapsing, everyone's broker than ever, but not them, right? They're richer than ever. Um, so again, like I said, our country means a lot more than whatever's going on in the stock market, right? We want our freedom, we want our rights, and we want our culture. We want to be surrounded by other people who, believe like us, God fearing men who love our country, and the values and morals, ethics, and values that we've talked about several times in the past. And that's what our country was founded on, and we're clearly losing that. um and the other thing I wanted to get here too, was a Canadian prepper did a video just earlier in the week. I think it was on Tuesday or Wednesday, about they had another shooting up there from a what they call a mentally, well, they were mentally deranged, mentally ill individual, but had to be of the transformer variety once again. And he did a pretty good video on that where he said, I'm going to try to cover this, objectively and non-politically, even though you really can't, right? This ultimately leads into politics, but he did do a good job of trying not to, overextend, which I'm going to try to do here myself, but, I'm a little bit more unforgiving than he is, and I'll just tell it like it is. But he, like I say, he did a good job. But anyway, and the point of the video, if you haven't heard about this, um, a male, um, two female person, killed his family. I think it was his mother and his stepbrother, and with an SKS, which I think was like one of the last semi-auto rifles unbanned in Canada. So you know where that's headed. But then, he goes in there and then goes to, I believe, his old school. He was no longer enrolled. I don't know if he graduated or, um, what happened there, but he returned to his old school and opened fire. And I think now they're saying like 8 or 9 dead, and, more wounded. I think it was around 20 wounded or something like that. But anyway, it turns out to be one of the, most deadliest shootings in Canadian history, which is unloading the political sphere and the conversations, and, banning the guns, or is it the mental health and whatnot? And it's a 100% the mental health. That is 100% what it is. But, Canada is a freaking liberal communist zone. So their answer is always ban more guns, just like what recently happened in Australia. And, they're down to dwindled down to everything's banned but like shotguns and bolt action rifles, and he uses a bolt action rifle. So then eventually you just end up to where it's absolutely nothing, like the UK and broadly across Europe, where then everyone just goes out and has knife battles. And I've done several videos of it before, of globalism is a failed religion. And that's what it has become for these people. It is their religion. The merging of worlds and populations and cultures. I talk about this often. Warring tribes, and fighting cultures, and thinking that you're going to bring them all together into an economic zone, right? Like we just talked about. And hey, as long as the cash is flowing and the printers are going burr, then you're what, everyone's going to be happy, right? The Muslim can live right next to the Jew. The Jews can live next to the Christians and the Buddhists and the Chinese Maoists, or the communists can live next to the capitalists and the this and that. And everyone's just going to get along because the money's flowing. Well, maybe that works for a very short period of time, like we saw, early, maybe in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe like when the experiment came to a head, basically, right? Because we talk about the population. What was it? Tucker just did a good video on this about the population of like Chicago and New York City and stuff like that in the 50s, and it's all like 90% white. Of course, the immigration ramped up, and it was still peaceful and majorly cohesive, and a lot of the early immigrants realized where they were coming. They were coming to America, right, which was a white Christian country. A lot of them assimilated better because that was, clearly what it was. Now you show up and you don't know what it is. And the message is almost like it's free reign, and you could do whatever you want. We saw, look at recent events in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and how that's changed, and how the Somali, that was endorsed by Ilhan Omar, lost his election due to old old country inner conflict battles, right? Which again, I say they don't leave it at home, right? They come here and go, oh no, I can't remember what they were, their religion, or specifically, I don't give a fuck, right? They're Somalis. Um, but it's like, you think, oh, a Muslim runs and they're all just gonna back them. They're like, oh no, you're a Shiite, you're a Sunni, you're a Houthi rebel, you're a Uyghur, you're this and that, and no, you killed my people. You're the reason our country fell, back in whatever, 45. My grandfather told me about you people. And now you're in America, and they're not going to come together and assimilate behind that message. And you know, well, I'm not going to say they're not all going to, convert or assimilate to America, but the vast majority these days are not doing that. And anyway, I want to get back on track with a Canadian prepper. Towards the end of his video, he said, this is a very, this is out in the country, and the people who lived out there were trying to escape the rat race, and he's like, he came to the conclusion like you can't run from this, and I did several videos on that, and this was the point I was trying to get to and make about the balkanization. And I see so many videos these days of people talking about, picking up their bags and running, and oh, I moved over here, and, a new channel name, and I'm building a homestead over here because, this happened, and it follows you wherever you go, and you cannot run. And I mean, so many places I've heard this too from so many people of, oh, I came from California and I moved to, um wherever they moved to. Oh, I moved to Oregon. And then it's like, that's a great example of a state because, the pioneers, right? The Oregon Trail, the blazing a trail out west, the wild, wild west, and freedom, and go out there. And there's a lot of freedom minded people out there. And then it takes one city, right? Portland, where they fester the rot of degeneracy and filth and all this stuff, and it takes over the state, as is many places, what I talked about in my balkanization video. Every state has a spot of cancer, and they spread it, and they turn it, and there's nowhere to run. And everyone thinks like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get my freedom over here. To my Tennessee friends, I've talked about that. I think I talked about that in my balkanization videos. I got a lot of friends in Tennessee, that I've talked to. And after the Christchurch thing, same thing. They're like, we never thought it would happen here. And not only does, you know, the deranged transformer open fire in a Christian school, then you see the liberals come out of the woodwork and try to ban, Nashville, right? The yuppies in Nashville are going to tell you, no, they side with the troon and they want to take your guns. And people are like, it's never going to happen here in Tennessee. Oh, yeah, you're just a little bit down the road. Like I've always said with Texas and Florida and all these people who claim to be, red state havens and all this stuff, which, by the way, another arrest just happened in Florida where they arrested a guy for having body armor and I think a firearm and a knife. They just arrested him and took his property with no charges because of pre-crime, essentially. They're like, what are you doing armored up and, having weapons on you? So, even in your base red states, right, they do all this stuff. And that creeps in. It's the thought of, well, that does look a little suspicious. And, what about, what could he do? And we want to feel safe. So, people will actually applaud that kind of behavior and be like, I'm glad he got arrested and checked out or whatnot, um, and got his stuff taken away from him because, all in the name of safety. And I've talked about it plenty of times about, if you make moves, um, you limit your freedom in the name of safety, you'll lose both. You'll get neither. And that's where we're at as a country, and you're losing the ability to run. And they'll find you anywhere. They'll do it. Look at Ruby Ridge, and you can move to the mountains and be in a cabin in Idaho, out in the middle of nowhere, and the feds will still try to run you down and trap you on some firearm manufacturing bullshit and execute your infant son, and your wife out in the middle of the mountains, kill your dog, um, raid your property and destroy your life. And so there is no running from these redcoats. And everyone's got the idea of like, go here, go there. And as I talked in my balkanization video, all that's going to do is bunch you into a crowd where then they can declare war. Again, it's like eventually everyone's going to end up in, you know, Texas or wherever, Alabama, Mississippi. And everyone's going to be like, that's where the freedom is. That's where the real patriots are going to assemble. And then the whole surrounding, 49 states are going to go to war with Alabama. And you're all going to be there. And that's when they'll probably just, maybe not, I joked about, they're probably just going to drop a nuke on it. They might, but, that surrounding fallout there, they don't want to be affected by that. They'll probably carpet bomb it with a whole bunch of Moabs, right? So you need to dig in your heels and fight where you're at now, because there's nowhere to run from it. They're pushing, and the internet, this was a topic I wanted to touch on. It is the vast spreader of this ideology. I mean, look at where we're at, right? Like my generation, um I can't remember where I fall in the millennial category. I mean, I'm a millennial, but I think I'm on the more of the older end of the millennial spectrum. But we're the last generation, right? The ones that actually like played outside, who had a childhood out in the dirt, right? Out in the woods, playing with sticks and um matchbox cars and the out in the dirt and stuff like that, playing baseball out in the field and playing sports, doing stuff. And the internet came along and spread all these other ideology and ultimately degeneracy. And I mean, you look at the uptick, like back then we didn't know any gay people or anything like that. And now they say what it went from like 2% of a population to now 25% of Gen Z um you identify as bi or gay. So it's this internet culture, and it reaches everywhere, to the corners of the mountains, to as rural and as country as you can get. And it messes with young children's minds and makes them, question things and not understand what's going on. And then it pushes, and the leftist agenda behind it is, well, it's these, you know, conservative, uh, you know, Republican around the thinking. And I recently talked too about hick libs, and it's my new favorite term. And these, and I've met a few of these people. And, like I said, I got friends that, and some family that live out in the boonies, and they're out there. And I've gone on trips before, and out there, and go camping or something. And I've met some people where I like talking to these people and getting their perspective, and you meet a lot of cool people. And then every once in a while you come across one who's like, um I met this one guy who, was full on country, and he had, more of an accent than I have, which I don't even know if I have an accent. But he was on full on, like, it's these damn gun toting MAGAs that are, out here, and these Republicans, messing up this state and destroying our country. And I'm like, he's like, I hate these rednecks. And I'm looking at him like, bro, you're a redneck. And I didn't say that to him because I could already see he was like about to go off the rails. And I'm just like, how long have you lived here? He's like, oh, I've been here for like 19 20 years. And I'm just like, you know, damn, man. And like, they're out there. And I've talked about the farmers who are, socialists, and, all this. And I believe these were people who were, uh, you know, as the online stuff came about, and they're looking at all this, and all the stuff was pushing, this leftist agenda and socialism, and new ways of life, and all this new age, push that there is. And this destroyed a lot of people's mindset, and led to where we are. But anyway, man, I'm off on the ramble again. Let me know what you think about it. Um, and yeah, we're not running from it. You cannot run from this. Till the next one, you know what it is, man. We are on our own. No one's coming to save us. So get right with God, because only God can save you. Freedom fighters out.